Harper watched the F-16 being secured, the right wing strapped and reinforced by the ground crew, every movement careful, deliberate, as if any sudden shift could collapse the damaged metal. She took a deep breath, the storm of adrenaline finally giving way to exhaustion, but her mind was still racing, replaying the impossible flight, every calculation, every adjustment that had kept the jet airborne. The general standing nearby, his arms crossed face tight, but eyes betraying the awe. No one spoke, the runway silent, except for the distant hum of engines still warming and the occasional shuffle of boots on gravel. She walked slowly toward the squadron building, the weight of survival pressing down with each step. The officers and technicians, moving around her like she was both miracle and anomaly. Her uniform soaked and streaked with smoke and rain, dirt and sweat adhering to fabric. The smell of fuel and burnt metal still heavy in the air, she moved past the vehicles and equipment, her eyes scanning every shadow, every edge, knowing instinctively the airspace remained hostile and unpredictable even after the impossible landing. Inside the briefing room, officers gathered around screens displaying radar data and satellite imagery of the mission area, every map a testament to what had been expected and what had actually occurred. Harper stood at the edge, listening as analysts tried to reconcile the impossible, her aircraft declared destroyed, her survival unrecorded, and yet undeniable. The general leaned forward, studying the displays, his brow furrowed, the silence heavy with tension. The reality of the flight still echoing in every calculation and report displayed on the screens. A comms officer handed her a headset. Static and a crackle filling the space as a voice came over, confirming all systems accounted for, all crew safe. She nodded silently, the words reassuring yet distant. The impossible flight still vivid in her mind. Every vibration, every shift of the jet through the storm, a memory she could not erase. Her hands flexed as if holding controls, still the muscle memory of micro-adjustments in the air-keeping balance between collapse and survival, too real to dismiss, even now. The general finally spoke, his voice low, measured, and careful. "Harper, you have rewritten records. You have done what no pilot was expected to do, and yet this will be classified. You will receive commendation, but the world will not know." And you nodded, understanding the weight of survival and the unrecorded miracle. The impossible flight would remain in quiet reports and internal logs, but she had lived through it, every second etched into mind and body like a scar that would not fade. Technicians began inspecting the F-16 more thoroughly. The right wing stressed every joint, every rivet scrutinized with instruments and gauges. Harper watched each measurement, each reading confirming what she already knew. The jet had survived, but barely every vibration and shudder. A reminder of how close to destruction she had flown. The calculations still vivid, the maneuvers still alive in muscle memory and thought, the impossible made real by instinct, determination, and courage alone. Outside, the sky cleared, leaving the sun, bright and sharp, illuminating the wet tarmac, the metal of the F-16 gleaming. Despite damage, Harper walked slowly past it, every glance, calculating the limits she had pushed, the risks she had taken, every second of flight balancing physics and survival. She could still feel the vibrations of the damaged wing beneath her feet, as if the jet remembered what it had endured, the air around her quiet, except for the soft hum of cooling engines and the occasional distant bird. The squadron gathered finally, around her and the general, the room heavy with silence and unspoken acknowledgement of the impossible mission. The radar logs confirmed what had occurred, the enemy engagement, the missile paths, and the F-16's survival, every calculation impossible. Yet real. Harper met the eyes of each officer in turn, knowing that no explanation could truly capture the sequence of survival, the instinct and skill that had carried her across hostile territory and through failing systems intact. She leaned against a railing, watching the crew carefully maneuver the jet toward the maintenance hangar. the metal groaning under its own weight, every step a reminder of the fragile line between success and disaster. She felt the weight of command expectations and disbelief hanging heavy in the air. The reports would try to categorize it, but they would never capture the feeling of controlling a failing aircraft inch by inch against every known limit of physics, every maneuver a defiance of the impossible, and every second a test of survival. Harper closed her eyes, briefly recalling the flight, the smoke, the wind, the thunder of anti-aircraft fire, the whine of the remaining engine, and the impossible calculations that had kept her alive. The general approached quietly, standing at her side, the acknowledgement in his eyes silent but heavy. The mission had been considered lost, yet she had returned, and the impossible proved real. The F-16 limping on one wing, a testament to what determination and skill could accomplish when every expectation had failed, and as the sun rose higher, illuminating the wet tarmac and twisted metal, Harper knew that the mission was far from over. The skies would call again, and the limits of survival and skill would be tested further. The memory of the impossible flight would remain as a guide, a warning, and a promise that even when declared lost against every expectation, survival could prevail and she could prove the impossible real once more. Harper stood beside the F-16 in the hangar, the metal scarred and twisted from the impossible flight smoke still rising faintly from the right wing, the smell of fuel and scorched metal clinging to the air, her uniform streaked with grime and sweat, yet she remained upright, every muscle trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. The ground crew worked carefully, securing the aircraft, every movement deliberate, as if the jet itself could collapse beneath the slightest touch. Her eyes scanned the hangar lights, reflecting off the damaged fuselage, each shadow a reminder of what had occurred and what could have ended her life at any moment. The general entered quietly, his boots echoing against the concrete floor, eyes fixed on the aircraft he had declared lost hours before his gaze shifted to Harper, steady and unflinching, and for a moment neither spoke, the weight of the impossible hanging heavy in the air. "You have done what no one believed possible," he finally said. Voice low and measured. Harper nodded, understanding that words could not capture the precision, instinct, and courage that had carried her through the storm and enemy fire, through failing systems, and a wing on the brink of collapse. Technicians began a detailed inspection, documenting every stress fracture, every scorched panel and warning light that had flashed relentlessly during the flight. Harper moved closer, observing every measurement, confirming in her mind what she already knew: the jet had survived against all odds, and she had survived with it, every maneuver, each calculation, each micro-adjustment alive in her memory, her pulse still echoing the rhythm of the impossible journey through the sky. The comms officer approached with a handheld device crackling as he handed her a radio. The line opened to command, static and anticipation filling the silence. She lifted it slowly, waiting for the voice to confirm her survival, to acknowledge the impossible feat. A voice came through, confirming visual and status alive and intact. Harper nodded silently, knowing the reports would be logged, but the world would not hear the story in full, only fragments of what she had endured. The impossible flight would exist in classified records and in memory alone. Outside the hangar, the sky had cleared, the storm passed, leaving low clouds and sunlight glinting off wet tarmac. Harper could see the runway faintly in the distance, the stretch that had tested every skill, every calculation she had ever learned. The memory of every twist, dive, and micro-adjustment alive in her mind, a scar etched into muscle and thought, the impossible, now real and undeniable. The ground crew moved cautiously, securing the right wing, bracing it against collapse, the metal flexing slightly, as if remembering every strain endured and every second she had fought to survive. The general stepped closer, his voice softer this time. Acknowledging Harper, You have rewritten records, defied expectations, and survived where no one expected. He paused, letting the words sink in, yet still the weight of command and disbelief lingered in his eyes. Harper met his gaze, steady calm, despite exhaustion, every nerve alive with the memory of flight. The impossible now a reality she had lived to prove her. Skill and courage beyond question, beyond record, and beyond what anyone had believed possible. She walked slowly around the aircraft, observing the damage, every mark telling a story. The twisted fuselage, the scorched wing, the flexing metal, every panel, scarred a testament to the impossible journey she had endured. The hangar was silent, except for the hum of cooling engines and distant footsteps. Her thoughts focused entirely on the micro-adjustments, the calculations and instinct that had kept. The jet aloft through enemy fire and failing systems, the impossible rendered real by determination, skill, and survival. Instinct, Harper paused, looking at the nose of the jet, imagining the final approach, the runway rushing beneath her engines, screaming, the missing lift forcing every calculation, every movement into razor-thin precision. She could feel the vibrations and stress still in memory, muscle and mind aligned with every second of flight. The impossible had been navigated inch by inch, meter by meter, and she had survived the declaration of downed against every expectation, alive and intact against the odds. The squadron gathered finally in the hangar, eyes wide and silent, their whispers confirming. The runway stretched beneath Harper's eyes, a narrow ribbon cutting through the landscape, her pulse hammering as the damaged F-16 screamed against the wind, every vibration a warning that one miscalculation would send her crashing. The canopy rattled, the metal groaning under the stress of the missing wing. The left engine pumping hard to compensate for every lost ounce of lift. She adjusted the throttle finely, every movement, calculated every second, crucial. The ground rushing toward her, faster than she wanted, yet slowly enough that every micro-adjustment mattered. She skimmed the treetops near the edge of the airfield, the wind gusting violently, the jet listing harder to the right, every movement threatening to tear the fuselage. Apart, Harper's hands ached from the strain pressing rudder and ailerons, twisting her body to feel the aircraft's balance. She could hear the warning alarms blaring, though she ignored them, her focus only on the runway and the impossible task of making it alive every second, stretching the line between life and destruction, thinner than ever before. Smoke curled from the damaged right wing, obscuring part of her vision. But Harper forced herself to ignore the haze, every maneuver precise, relying on instinct and training. The ground below coming closer with each passing heartbeat, she dipped lower, adjusting flaps and speed, fighting gravity turbulence and metal failure all at once. The general's words echoed in her mind, cold, certain. You are lost, already declared downed, and yet she was here alive, still fighting, still refusing to accept defeat. Her eyes sharp, scanning the runway, the edges of the field littered with debris from previous storms and the occasional abandoned vehicle. The left engine screamed overdrive, compensating for every lack of lift from the damaged wing. Harper pressed forward, adjusting trim rudder and throttle, constantly calculating trajectory, descent rate, and speed, the airframe creaking violently under. The stress, and she could feel the vibrations travel through the cockpit into her bones. The jet straining, yet responding just enough to keep her alive. Every twist, dip, and roll calculated to microsecond precision as she threaded the needle between failing systems and 1,000 small obstacles that would have ended any other pilot. The runway markers became clearer, the faint lines cutting through fog and mist. She aligned the aircraft, carefully balancing speed, lift, and angle. She knew that touching down even a meter offline could collapse the wing instantly. Harper leaned into the controls, countering every gust, adjusting flaps, incrementally relying on instincts honed over thousands of flight hours. Every vibration a heartbeat, every heartbeat a warning. The metal groaning like it was alive and protesting. Her commands. Smoke and sparks erupted from the damaged wing as she banked slightly. Correcting alignment. The nose pitched down, her pulse rising with every meter she closed. In the runway, her training took over precise adjustments. Every motion smooth, calculated even as the jet shuddered violently from the missing wing. She could feel it flexing, threatening to fail at any moment. Yet she pressed forward knowing any hesitation could be fatal. Below, the runway surface appeared littered with debris, small rocks displaced from previous storms. She navigated over them, using micro-altitude adjustments, tiny shifts that kept the landing approach viable, Harper felt. The canopy rattled violently as the right wing flexed dangerously, the engine screaming all control surfaces at maximum deflection, every vibration a reminder that the jet could fail at any moment. Her fingers flew over the throttle flaps and rudder, pedals adjusting for turbulence, wind gusts, and airframe fatigue. The runway approaching faster than anticipated, and still the distance stretched impossibly. She could feel the sweat running down her face and the strain in her muscles, every nerve. Alert, each decision critical. The first visual markers of the runway threshold came into view, her eyes narrowing to judge distance, speed, and angle. She dipped slightly, compensating for the lost lift, the jet listing dangerously but still responsive. Harper whispered to herself. Steady, steady, guiding the aircraft inch by inch over the last stretch of grass and tarmac. The vibrations reaching a crescendo, the stress on the fuselage screaming at her to release controls. But she held firm, trusting. Instincts and training over failing instruments and alarms. The wind shifted, suddenly tossing the jet violently. She countered every motion, micro-adjustments, correcting roll, yaw, and pitch, simultaneously the canopy, rattling metal groaning beneath. Her hands, she could hear the engine screaming, the fuselage whining under pressure, yet she pressed on, trusting her calculations, her instincts, and every ounce of experience to carry her safely across the threshold of the runway, each meter a gamble, each second a life suspended between survival and destruction. Harper felt the landing gear touch the tarmac. The shock transmitted violently through the frame, the right wing groaning louder than ever. Yet she held steady, slowing the aircraft gradually. Letting friction and remaining lift reduce speed, she could feel the heat from the tires and the drag of the damaged wing resisting. Yet she pressed on, inching forward along the runway, the horizon finally stationary beneath her and the impossible, beginning to feel real. Radio chatter erupted suddenly behind her, a voice frantic and shocked, confirming visual, the F-16 is limping home. They were watching her landing from the tower, the squadron stunned by what had been declared lost, now arriving. Intact, the runway ahead stretched open for the final moments of survival. Harper kept her focus on controlling the jet, balancing every ounce of power and drag. Against the failing wing, she could feel the metal threatening to tear each vibration. A warning. And yet the aircraft remained just enough under her control. And as she guided the F-16 to a full stop, the engines whining and the metal flexing painfully, she knew she had survived what no one expected and defied what the general had declared impossible. Her hands shaking yet steady on the controls, the runway finally beneath her, the impossible now achieved. And yet the story of survival far from over. Harper eased the F-16 to a complete stop, the damaged wing quivering like a living thing beneath her hands, smoke still curling from the stress fractures, the left engine whining as if protesting the sudden lack of motion. She exhaled slowly, her body trembling from adrenaline and fatigue, every muscle aching, every nerve, screaming relief and disbelief at the fact she had survived the impossible. The control tower was alive with frantic chatter spotting reports, scrambling personnel confirming eyes wide and mouths open as if they could not believe what they had just witnessed. The canopy hissed as she lifted it slowly, the smell of smoke and fuel filling the cockpit. Her boots hit the floor, metal groaning beneath weight. She moved carefully, knowing that one wrong step could shift the jet dangerously. The ground crew rushed toward the aircraft, caution and awe in their movements, every eye on the right wing bending at impossible angles, yet somehow still intact. Harper's visor fogged with sweat. She shook her head, focusing on keeping control until the crew secured her and checked for immediate hazards. Voices crackled over the radio reports, confirming the visual all systems down, except the engine left wing failing, but pilot alive and intact. The squadron was stunned. Command already had her, marked down as lost, but here she was alive, defying records and assumptions. Harper swung her head slowly, watching the crew work each movement, deliberate, precise, ensuring no sudden collapse, the right wing flexing under its own weight, threatening to fail under the slightest pressure. She kept her hands on the throttles until the last engine hissed quiet, the instruments finally giving her silence that was still tense, because it meant the battle was not over yet. The general arrived moments, later face ashen and eyes sharp, scanning the aircraft, disbelief clear in his movements. He stepped closer, every step measured and slow, as if afraid the F-16 might collapse beneath him. He opened his mouth to speak, but Harper lifted a hand, shaking. Her head, the voice she had been holding silent, finally emerging steady, despite exhaustion. "You declared me downed, sir. I am still here." His jaw tightened, a brief nod acknowledging the impossible reality before him, yet the weight of reports and expectations still hung heavy in the air around them. Harper climbed out, fully aware of every groan of metal and flex in the aircraft, her body trembling but unbroken. She scanned the runway, noting the distance, the markings, the edges, and the debris from storms and previous missions. The landing had been a dance between precision and survival, and even now she knew the F-16 could not withstand much more. It was a miracle, and she carried that knowledge quietly inside her every second, a memory of what should have ended her flight hours ago. The crew moved around the jet, carefully checking the fuselage engine and the right wing, every glance filled with concern and awe. They worked methodically, measuring flex pressure and stress marks, recording every detail for engineers and command. The general stayed close, yet his expression remained unreadable, a mixture of respect, disbelief, and the unspoken question of how she had survived, where all expectations said she would fail. Harper watched silently, knowing that explanations would take hours and that the true story of survival would be filtered through protocol and classified reports that might never tell the full truth. She finally moved away from the F-16, the weight of adrenaline leaving, her body slowly replaced by exhaustion, fatigue pressing down like a heavy cloak. Her boots crunched against the gravel. The storm earlier long passed, leaving the runway wet and mist rising from the tarmac. She looked up toward the cloud. Lieutenant Harper gritted her teeth as the alarms blared through the cockpit. The F-16 shuddering violently beneath her hands, smoke curling from the engine and warning lights flashing red across the panel. She fought to maintain control over the bird, twisting and tilting with each gust of wind. The enemy radar had locked on, and missiles had torn past her tail, leaving scorched trails in the sky. The general had already declared her lost over the comms, a final transmission cut off before she could respond. But Harper was alive and burning with the stubborn defiance that had carried her through every mission before. Her fingers moved with precision across the controls, throttling back, adjusting flaps and stabilizers every microsecond. Mattered. She could feel the wing on the right side failing more with every maneuver, pressure building against the fuselage and fuel leaking silently somewhere deep inside. The clouds above rolled thick and gray, obscuring vision. But the ground below was a blur of hills and rivers. Harper knew she had to find a path home. Her survival depended on navigating through enemy territory and treacherous weather, at the same time each second leaving the possibility of failure closer than the horizon. Harper glanced at the instrumentation, her eyes sharp against the red glow of failure, the left engine pumping steadily but struggling to compensate for the lost wing. The aircraft listing dangerously, yet she pressed forward, adjusting altitude and angle. With care, she could hear the distant echoes of anti-aircraft fire still chasing her through the valley, the hum of the remaining engine filling her ears, every vibration, a reminder that one wrong move could send her tumbling into oblivion the sky. Stretching endlessly above and below a gauntlet she had to survive. Her mind flashed to the squadron briefing, the words of the general echoing cold and certain, "You will not make it back." The last radar sweep confirmed her aircraft shredded and burning. The official logs marking her down lost in enemy airspace. But Harper had never allowed orders to dictate survival. She had always trusted her instincts, relied on calculations honed by years of flying maneuvers into the impossible. She banked sharply, twisting against the failing wing, the metal groaning with protest as she threaded through a canyon, the sides razor-thin and every turn a gamble with gravity and physics, her heart hammering and her pulse a steady drum driving her forward. Smoke began to curl from the cockpit seams obscuring parts of her view, her visor speckled with ash from small fragments she had no time to clear as flares streaked past above, sending the enemy scrambling in panic. But there were more missiles incoming, and the left engine screamed in overdrive, the aircraft responding sluggishly to commands. Yet Harper pressed on, calculating trajectory angles, wind resistance, and the minimum safe glide to keep her alive. She could hear her own breathing amplified. Inside the cockpit, the silence between alarms deafening compared to the chaos of the outside world, the canyon narrowing ahead and each second pulling her closer to disaster. A flash of radar on the HUD caught her eye, a cluster of missiles approaching. From multiple vectors, Harper ducked the nose down, twisting the jet violently rolling to the left, the wing nearly folding beneath the stress, and she held it forcing the jet through a narrow pass between cliffs, the missiles detonating harmlessly, behind leaving debris and smoke in their wake. Her vision blurred by sweat and the failing systems, she pressed the throttle harder. Her body rigid against the seat restraints, feeling the strain of gravity and metal fused into a single excruciating motion. Harper knew she had to cross the enemy territory quickly. The airspace crawling with patrols and SAM sites, she banked again, dipping below the cloud cover, skimming treetops and ridgelines, calculating every second, every meter, while the aircraft groaned under the uneven lift, the wing damage causing unpredictable shifts. And yet she advanced forward, a ghost weaving through radar lines and anti-air fire, a phantom not yet defeated by what should have been certain death. The horizon stretched. Far ahead, nothing but more danger, and yet the faint glimmer of hope pulled her onward. Radio silence enveloped her. The general had cut communications. The official stance confirmed the worst. The airspace reported her gone. The F-16 officially destroyed. And yet here she was, alive, guiding herself with nothing but skill, nerve, and the raw determination of someone who refused to be written off. She could hear the faint hiss of hydraulics failing and the groan of metal splitting. Yet she pressed on, threading the impossible canyon passage each turn, bringing her closer to home. Each moment leaving the possibility of catastrophe lingering like a shadow. Then ahead, the faint glint of sunlight broke through the clouds, just for a moment, illuminating a ridge. A potential landing zone, distant but visible. Harper adjusted altitude, banking carefully her remaining engine, whining against the load and every vibration screaming warning. Her fingers were raw and trembling, yet she calculated each movement, knowing that even a single wrong adjustment could flip the jet, sending her to the ground in a twisted heap of fire and metal. She pressed forward, moving closer to the ridge, each second stretching into eternity, and every heartbeat leaving her fate, suspended in the balance. And even as she flew, she knew the general would never believe what was happening. She knew the reports would say she had been lost, that the mission was over, that she would be written off. And yet Harper kept going each twist, and turn each calculation, each push against gravity and failure, proving she was not done, not yet, and the faint ridge ahead promised either survival or the final test of all she had learned in a career built on defying the impossible. Harper tightened, her grip on the controls, her knuckles white against the worn surface. The F-16 listing dangerously to the right, the damaged wing straining against the air. Every vibration, a warning that the metal could give at any moment. She scanned the ridge. Ahead, calculating approach angle. Altitude, wind gusts. Every microsecond mattered, her mind working faster than the failing instruments could keep up. She could hear faint echoes of distant anti-aircraft fire, the crackle and whistle of radar guided. Rounds tracing her path, but she ignored them, focusing solely on survival and the slim hope that she could make it across hostile territory and somehow limp home. The canopy of clouds above thickened as she climbed slightly, hoping for concealment. But the wind turbulence pushed the jet violently side to side. Harper countered every shift, adjusting rudder and ailerons, carefully knowing that one mistake could roll her into a canyon or snap the weakened wing completely. She felt the heat of the left engine overdrive. It was screaming but still alive, pumping thrust to compensate for the missing lift on the right. She gritted her teeth and pushed forward, leaning into the controls as if her own strength could stabilize the aircraft that had been declared lost hours ago. Her visor fogged with sweat and the smoke that had seeped into the cockpit. The HUD flickering warnings of fuel low engine stress and wing integrity failure flashing in a rhythm she had memorized over countless missions. She ignored the alerts. She could read the flight pattern in her head, calculations flowing through her mind like a code, a survival algorithm, her instincts honed over years, moving the jet in ways few could manage under normal conditions. Let alone on one wing across hostile airspace, enemy radar blips appeared intermittently. She twisted the nose down, weaving between signals, dipping low over treetops, avoiding visual detection as best she could. Harper remembered the briefing words. Echoing in her mind, the general certain and cold, "You will not make it back." They had already filed the report claiming her lost and the mission over, but she refused to accept it. She banked sharply, the canopy rattling with the stress the right. Wing groaning, she felt it shudder beneath her hands. Every command met with resistance that threatened to rip the aircraft apart. Yet she pressed on, calculating every movement, adjusting throttle pitch, yaw, and flaps with micro-precision. The river. Below shimmered in the early light, a possible path to follow toward a friendly airfield, distant but visible through the cloud gaps. Smoke from the damaged wing trailed behind her, curling in long, thin streams across the sky. She could see the enemy. Positions in the valley below, small anti-aircraft batteries and radar posts moving to reacquire targets. Her pulse hammering in rhythm with the jet. Every vibration, every whistle of the engine feeding adrenaline and focus. The F-16 responded sluggishly, but still moved. She dipped lower to avoid detection, hugging the contours of hills and ridges while gauging the limits of the aircraft, her training pushing her beyond anything standard protocols would allow. The sun broke briefly through the clouds, illuminating patches of the forest below, glinting off scattered water and making shadows jump unnaturally. She banked again, following the ridgeline, the wing flexing under the stress, and she could feel each seam bending, threatening to tear. She gritted her teeth, pressed harder on the throttle, trusting calculations, instincts, and luck to keep her aloft. She could hear the faint hum of the left engine straining to compensate for the missing lift. The sound, a constant reminder that any miscalculation could end this flight instantly. Ahead, the faint outline of the airfield appeared through breaks in the clouds, a long strip of asphalt stretching through trees. Harper adjusted her approach carefully, running calculations in her head, speed angle, descent rate, the wing holding just long enough to keep her moving toward it. She banked sharply to line up with the runway. Despite the damage, the jet responded sluggishly, but